Hello, this is Dr. Bibber. Welcome to a walking classroom where we're going to be talking about the self-determination theory. So if you haven't yet, you can stand up, you can start to walk around the Coliseum, you can find yourself in the weight room and walk on the treadmill, you can choose to run if you'd like to, you can get on the stationary bike, you can lift weights if you really want to, you can go into the Wolf Wellness Lab and walk or run on the treadmills as well. Or if it's sunny out, feel free to go outside and enjoy the weather. Research actually shows you tend to learn better if you're outside in nature. You tend to retain more information. So if that's available to you, feel free to do that. So again, today we're going to be talking about theory, the self-determination theory. And again, why we need theories, again, are to help us understand physical activity behavior. So we want to try to understand why someone is motivated or not motivated to be physically active. And the self-determination theory is just like what it sounds. It's an individual's personal determination. So the determination determined, so it's determined by themselves. So it seems a little redundant, and it is. So as opposed to someone else telling you to do something, this whole theory is about your willingness and your own personal motivation. And it's important to talk about this theory because we tend to have some very major and minor barriers when it comes to engaging in physical activity. I've said this in the past, but if everyone was physically active, adhered to the physical activity and weight training and muscle and bone density requirements, then I wouldn't have a job. So some of those major barriers, which you might have heard in other classes, are time, energy, and motivation. So those are the three biggest things that get in the way of someone feeling motivated to engage in exercise and someone actually performing physical activity or exercise behavior. So that's what you're trying to combat day in and day out, is that lack of time, that lack of energy, that lack of motivation. Again, we could talk about dozens of other barriers, including the cost of exercise or the cost of facilities, the cost of equipment and attire. You could talk about feeling uncomfortable, not having the skill or the knowledge to engage in physical activity, not having childcare. If you're a parent or if you're a sibling that watches over children, you might not have somewhere to take the kids while you want to engage in physical activity. You might not have a car or a bus or public transit to get there. We also have our societal barriers, which include sitting at a desk. So if you think about coming to class, you probably drove here, then you sit in a chair for an hour, hour and 15 minutes, then you have a little bit of break, then you go to another class, then you go to work, and you might be sitting or standing, but by the end of the day, you're exhausted. After staring at a laptop, sitting all day, these are barriers that get in the way of our motivation to be physically active. So think about all the things we're combating. These are all part of an obesogenic environment. All these minor, moderate, and major barriers, as well as our societal and environmental barriers. The self-determination theory, what it's trying to do is help us understand the basic needs that need to be met in order for someone to be successful in physical activity. So in order to be motivated and actually engage in physical activity, there are three basic needs that need to be met. One is autonomy. So that's the desire to have control to initiate your own physical activity plan or behavior. So as opposed to me telling you to do something like we're doing right now, I told you to get up and walk, right? As opposed to that, autonomy involves you having the ability to choose what you do, when you do, where you do it. So by me giving the option to walk, run, lift weights, be on the elliptical, be on the bike, I'm hopefully providing you with a little bit of autonomy in choosing a type of physical activity to make it more enjoyable. So that's the first basic need. If you feel like you have control and the say-so over your type of physical activity or exercise, you'll be more motivated. There's also what's called competence. Do you feel like you have the abilities and the capabilities and the resources to be successful? So some of the things that get in the way of our success are those barriers that we talked about. It could be something as simple as it's raining outside. You were planning on going for a run today, but now it's raining, so you don't feel competent to run when it's raining, right? Or it could be you want to start lifting weights, but you have no idea how. You don't know how much weight, how many reps, how many sets, if you're doing the proper form, things like that. So we have autonomy, we have competence, then we also have relatedness or social interaction. So that means when you engage in physical activity and exercise, you tend to be more motivated if you are doing that with others of importance, those you like, people in your own personal social circle. So if you can join a club sport, join a team, engage in group fit classes, things like that, you're automatically building in social interactions and relatedness. So, in order for you to feel self determined to exercise, you need autonomy, competence, and relatedness. Now, when we talk about our self determined motivation, it's on a continuum. So, it goes from a motivation, which is an individual having literally no motivation to do anything at all, no knowledge that they need to engage in physical activity, all the way up to what's called intrinsic motivation. And we'll recap these as well when we get in class. But a motivation, again, is you have no intention of being active. You have no intention of engaging in exercise or physical activity. So you might not have the knowledge of the importance of physical activity. You have zero desire to engage in physical activity. You might not think it's beneficial for you. But again, these individuals are not going to feel self-determined or motivated to engage in physical activity. They have no motivation. Now, as we move along, we're going to progress to more intrinsically based forms of motivation. So following a motivation is what's called external regulation. So this is when you feel motivated to engage in exercise to receive a reward or avoid a punishment. So if you've ever run a 5K and at the end they give you a free t-shirt, you might be running that just for external regulation, right? You're doing the Peachtree Road Race in Atlanta on the 4th of July just so that you can receive that free t-shirt. Or you might be playing on a sport team. You see this all the time with youth athletes. They're playing on a sports team just so they don't get in trouble by their parents, or just so they're doing something to make their parents happy. They're trying to avoid some form of punishment or receive praise from their parents, things like that. So that's external regulation. And it's solely dependent on that reward or avoiding punishment. Again, the next type of motivation is introjected regulation. This is when you exercise to avoid guilt or anxiety or maintain a feeling of pride or self-worth. Okay, so we see this all the time on Thanksgiving or around the holidays or starting a New Year's resolution where individuals feel some form of guilt regarding maybe their lack of activity over the holidays, how much they ate. You know, maybe you ate 2 pies on Thanksgiving, so then the next day you decide to go for a run or go to the gym, and you're doing that to avoid feeling guilty for what you ate. Some of us might not want to admit that, but that's more common than you think. But again, that can be a beneficial way to begin exercising, but over time, it just becomes your way of trying to seesaw back and forth between feeling pride and guilt, or avoiding anxiety about a certain behavior and compensating with exercise. So it can be a little bit difficult to maintain over a period of time. It can be rather unhealthy. The next type of motivation is identified regulation, and this is when you have some behavioral goal you're trying to achieve. Essentially, if you're engaging in a Couch to 5K program, which is every single day you run and then alternate with walking, and each day you increase the amount of running and you decrease the amount of walking. So day 1, you might walk for 10 minutes, run for 1 minute. Walk for 10 minutes, run for 1 minute. By day 10, you might be walking for 5, running for 5, until the point that you can run in a full 5K without stopping. And that would be identified regulation, that day in and day out you're engaging in physical activity so that you can achieve the goal of running a 5K. So again, identified regulation, you are engaging in physical activity, you're motivated to do so because you want to achieve something. And then we have integrated regulation. They all kind of sound the same, don't they? But integrated regulation is a type of motivation in which exercise motivation, or the actual behavior of engaging in physical activity, is congruent with how you view yourself. It's almost like it's part of your identity. It's almost the easiest way to view that. Integrated regulation is when physical activity or training becomes part of your identity. So you see this all the time with athletes when they say, hey, tell me about yourself. Oh, I'm a college soccer player. I'm a college basketball player. I'm a college gymnast. I play at XYZ University, right? So it's almost as if that sport has become part of their identity. I have a buddy who's a CrossFitter, and every time he has to describe himself, he says, yeah, I do CrossFit. And so you can see he engages in that because it's congruent with how he views himself. He values physical activity. He values strength training, and that becomes part of how he identifies himself. So integrated regulation is when exercise becomes part of how you view yourself in the world. And over the course of our lifetime, if you can build an exercise-related identity So if you can have integrated regulation, you tend to stick with it or adhere to exercise more effectively than those who don't value exercise or don't view it as part of their identity. And now the last type of motivation is intrinsic motivation. This is like the gold standard. This is what everyone wants to try to achieve. And so with intrinsic motivation, this is when you're motivated to engage in physical activity strictly because you enjoy it. There's no necessarily goal in mind. There's no obligation. There's no avoidance of anxiety or guilt. Intrinsic motivation is when you engage in physical activity or exercise or a sport strictly because it's pleasurable, you find it satisfying, you think it's totally enjoyable. I've given this example in other classes, but I truly enjoy running. When I go on vacation, one of the first things I do is I'll wake up early the next day and I'll go for a run on the beach. I go slow and I don't care, I go by myself strictly because I enjoy it. I'm not timing myself by any means. I have no goal in mind. I just go till I kind of want to stop, and then I'm done. I am intrinsically motivated to run. And you might realize that you have a certain activity that you are intrinsically motivated to engage in. And so the goal is over the course of your lifespan, engage in activities you like. So if you love lifting weights, do that. If you love swimming, start to do that. If you love riding bikes, join a cycling team, whatever it might be. Because if you enjoy something, if you're intrinsically motivated to do something, you'll be more likely to stick with it. And again, that's the most autonomous form of motivation, and it's the longest lasting in terms of adherence to exercise. So, as a quick recap, what we have all the way from A motivation, again, where you have no intention or no interest in activity. Then you have external regulation, where you're exercising to either get a reward or avoid a punishment. Then we have introjected regulation. You're exercising strictly because you have that sense of obligation. You feel like you have to. Then you have identified regulation, and that's when you're trying to achieve a personal goal for exercise. Then you have integrated regulation, and that's when exercise is part of your identity, part of how you describe yourself, or part of your personal value system. And lastly, we have intrinsic motivation, and that's when you're exercising strictly for the pleasure or for the satisfaction. So as you think about, these last couple of minutes for your walk, as you think about why you exercise, I want you to think, so am I doing it to look a certain way? Am I doing it because someone else is making me? Am I doing it for some external goal? Am I doing it because I tend to overeat and that's the only way I know how to handle that? Or are you exercising because you like it? So again, take some time, think about why you exercise, when you do it, how you do it, who you do it with. And you may realize that you have some room for growth. And you might find that you can incorporate some types of physical activity and some other people in your life to maintain competence, autonomy, and relatedness so that you could be more intrinsically motivated to be physically active. Because again, the goal is for everyone to enjoy the type of activity they do. Because if you enjoy what you do, one, it'll be more fun. Two, you'll try harder, you'll do it more frequently, you'll do it for a longer duration, and you'll stick with it over the course of a lifespan. And so as you start to make your way back to the classroom, I just want you to think about that. What do you enjoy doing in terms of physical activity? And what do you hate? And hopefully we can find a balance over the course of the semester in terms of physical activity and finding activities, one, that challenge you, and two, that you truly enjoy. So again, over the next 15 seconds, make your way back to the classroom, and you can take out your headphones, put your phone away, and thank you for listening to the Self-Determination Theory.